Why do we keep recreating the same version of ourselves? And I don't mean changing your hair, getting a new job, moving somewhere else, or deciding you're going to start going to the gym on Monday. I'm talking about something deeper than that. Why do we keep becoming the same person over and over again? The same reactions, the same fears, the same choices, same kind of relationships, same arguments, same disappointments, and same excuses. And then we look at our lives and think, why am I back here again? That's the part I find interesting because most of us actually want something different. We say we want a different life. We want different relationships. We want more freedom. We want to feel confident. We want to stop worrying so much. We want to stop repeating the same mistakes, and we want to feel like ourselves again. But wanting something different and being willing to become different are two completely different things. And that's where we get stuck because the version of you that got you here is usually the version of you you're still using to try to get somewhere else. Think about that. You're trying to create a different experience with the same reactions, the same beliefs, the same expectations, the same habits, the same way of choosing. And then you're surprised when you end up with something that feels familiar. Of course it feels familiar. You're still showing up as the same person. And I'm not saying that as an insult. I'm saying it because I think we make this much more complicated than it needs to be. If every time something happens, you respond the same way, you're going to keep getting very similar results. It's not some mystical law, that's just life. If someone disappoints you and you immediately shut down, that's a pattern. If someone gets close and you start looking for reasons not to trust them, that's a pattern. If you get an opportunity and immediately start talking yourself out of it, that's a pattern. If something goes wrong and you immediately assume it's your fault, that's a pattern. And if you feel uncomfortable and your first reaction is to run, control, fix, explain, or distract yourself, or make somebody else feel better, that's a pattern. And if you do those things long enough, you become part of your identity. You stop saying, this is something I do. You start saying, this is who I am. And that's a big difference because once you call something your identity, you stop questioning it. You protect it. You defend it. You find evidence for it. And you start collecting experiences that prove you were right about yourself all along. And that's how the cycle continues. Let's say you've decided you're someone who can't trust people. You meet someone, they do something completely normal. Maybe they don't text you back right away. Maybe they cancel plans. Maybe they seem distracted. Nothing has actually been proven, but your mind fills in the blanks. They don't really care. Oh, they're probably pulling away. I knew I couldn't trust them. Or here we go again. And now you're reacting to something that may not even be happening. Maybe you become distant. Maybe you get cold. Maybe you stop communicating. Maybe you test them or you decide you're done. And eventually they respond to the distance you're creating. Then you look at the situation and say, see, people always leave. But look at what happened. You had a belief. The belief affected how you interpreted the situation. The interpretation affected your behavior. Your behavior affected the relationship. And the result became evidence for the original belief. That's how you create an identity, my friends, not in one big decision, in hundreds of little ones every day. And this is why I don't think changing your identity is about sitting down and deciding, okay, from today forward, I'm confident. That's not how it works. You can say you're confident all day long, but if the moment you're challenged, you immediately look outside yourself for approval, your behavior is telling you something different. You can say you trust yourself, but if you can't make a decision without asking 5 people what they think, there's something worth looking at. You can say you love yourself, but if you keep abandoning your own needs to keep someone else happy, there's a disconnect somewhere. Again, I'm not saying that to judge you. I'm saying look at what you're actually doing because what you repeatedly do tells you much more about your current identity than what you say you want to believe. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Sometimes we don't actually want to change as much as we think we do. We want the pain to stop. We want the situation to change. We want the person to behave differently. We want more money. We want more freedom, and we want to feel better. But we don't necessarily want to give up the version of ourselves that keep producing the familiar experience because that version of us is familiar, and familiar feels safe, even when it's miserable. That's why people stay in situations they know are hurting them. That's why we repeat relationships that look different on the surface but feel exactly the same underneath. That's why someone can leave one job because they're tired of being controlled, only to end up in another environment where they feel controlled again. That's why someone can leave one relationship because they were never heard, then find themselves with someone else and still feel invisible. At some point, you have to stop looking only at the people and circumstances. You have to look at yourself, not in a blaming way, in an honest way. What are you bringing into these situations? What are you expecting? What are you tolerating? What are you afraid to say? What are you afraid to lose? And what are you repeatedly choosing? Because you can't change a pattern you refuse to see. And seeing it doesn't mean beating yourself up over it. Not at all. Actually, it should do quite the opposite. It should give you some relief. Because if you can see that you've been repeating something, then you can finally stop treating it like a mysterious curse. You can say, okay, I do this. That's enough to start. And you don't have to know exactly why yet. You don't have to fix it today. Just be honest. I keep doing this. I keep choosing this. I keep reacting this way. I keep expecting this. That's powerful because you're no longer pretending the pattern isn't there. And once you start noticing it, you'll see how often identity gets reinforced. Every time you say, I'm just not that kind of person, I've always been this way, that's just how I am, you're giving the identity another vote. And eventually, the identity becomes very convincing. You don't even have to think about it anymore. You just live it. That's what makes identity so powerful. It's not usually one huge decision. It's repetition. You repeat a thought, you repeat an action, you repeat a behavior, you repeat a story, and eventually it feels natural. And then you call it yourself. But natural doesn't always mean true. It can just mean familiar. That's something I think we need to get much more honest about, because we often assume that if something feels natural to us, it must be authentic, but not necessarily. Sometimes your most authentic reaction is the least conscious thing about you. You don't think before you do it. You just react. Someone says something, you get defensive. Someone gets close, you pull away. Someone criticizes you, you shut down. Something goes wrong, you panic. Someone needs something, you immediately say yes. You feel uncertain, you try to control everything. And then later you think, why did I do that? Because you weren't really choosing, you were repeating. And there's a huge difference between repeating yourself and choosing yourself. That's what I mean when I talk about recreating the same identity. You're not sitting down every morning and deciding who you're going to be. You're waking up and continuing yesterday, and then continuing the day before that, and the day before that. Same assumptions, same emotional reactions, same habits, same expectations, same interpretation of yourself. And because you're doing it every day, it feels like identity. But identity can change, not because you force it, because you stop reinforcing what no longer fits. That's a very different approach. You don't have to wake up tomorrow and become some completely new person. You don't have to pretend you're fearless. You don't have to convince yourself that everything is perfect. You don't have to create some fake version of yourself that walks around acting confident. You just have to start catching yourself. That's it. Catch the moment, catch the reaction, catch the story, catch the decision before you automatically do what you always do. And maybe someone disappoints you, and normally you would shut them out. This time you don't. You actually tell them what happened. Maybe normally you would say yes because you don't want somebody to be upset with you. This time you say no. Maybe normally you would talk yourself out of an opportunity because you're afraid you wouldn't be good enough. This time, let yourself try. Maybe normally you would stay quiet because you don't want conflict. This time, you say what you actually think. You speak up. Those moments may seem small, but they're not, because you're doing something different. And every time you do something different from the old pattern, you're giving yourself new evidence. You're showing yourself, I don't have to respond the way I always have. That's how change becomes real. Not because you declared a new identity, because you're behaving differently when the old trigger shows up. That's where the real work is. When you're triggered, when you're uncomfortable, when you're afraid or uncertain, that's when you find out what identity you're actually living from. Anyone in this world can say, I'm confident when everything is going well. The question is, what happens when someone disagrees with you? Anyone can say, I trust myself. The question is, what happens when you don't know what to do? Anyone can say, I know my worth. The question is, what happens when someone doesn't recognize it? And that's where the old identity usually shows itself. And that doesn't mean you failed. It means you found it. That's actually useful because now you know where the work is. You don't have to go searching for your patterns. They're right there. In the moments that keep getting a reaction out of you, in the situations that keep making you feel the same way, in the choices you keep making, even though you already know where they've led. That's the mirror, not some magical reflection. Your life gives you information. And the thing is, you have to pay attention to what it repeats because repetition tells you something. And maybe the question isn't, why does my life keep doing this to me? Maybe the better question is, what version of me keeps showing up to create this experience? And that's a much harder question, but it is an honest one. And once you can answer it, you have somewhere to begin. Because you don't have to fight your whole life. You don't have to reinvent yourself. You don't have to become somebody else. You just have to stop automatically recreating the same version of yourself. One choice at a time, one reaction at a time, one moment of honesty at a time. Eventually, the pattern starts to lose its grip and something changes. Not because you forced yourself to become someone new, because you stopped insisting on being who you had always been. And maybe that's what we're really talking about when we talk about returning to yourself. It's about remembering who you are, not going backwards, not finding some perfect version of you that existed before everything happened. Just becoming conscious enough to stop repeating what isn't working for you. Because the question isn't whether you're creating an identity, you are every day. The question is, are you consciously choosing it? Or are you just repeating the one you've already been given? And that's worth sitting with, my friends, because you may not need a new life. You may need to stop recreating the same person inside the life you already have.